This morning, we're taking a look at reported hate crimes here in Western Washington. And this map shows the locations of just some of the hate crimes on our radar since November, from Whatcom County all the way down to Thurston County, some related to religion, others reference race, gender, or sexual orientation. And the FBI plays a critical role in many of these types of investigations. The head of the FBI in Seattle joining our Brandy Cruz live in studio right now with more on how they are responding to a rise in biased crimes.
Yeah, good morning. And J.S. Junior Special Agent in charge of the FBI in Seattle. We appreciate you being here this morning. Hate crimes. We've been hearing a lot about this lately, and I know, the numbers sort of get mixed around with FBI numbers and Seattle numbers, but just generally speaking, is the FBI in Seattle seeing any sort of increase in any of these types of crimes?
So, Brandy, thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having us on the show. It's a little bit too early to talk to statistics because of the reporting in those statistics and how they're collected by the FBI when they're reported. So a little bit premature for me to talk. We are seeing a slight uptick, but an example of that uptick is the recent rash of threats to Jewish community centers nationwide, and then locally here, as you're aware, the Kent shooting that occurred a week and a half ago on Friday evening. Yeah,
and I want to get into that. And for our viewers who don't know, the FBI, when it collects stats on hate crimes, what it does is you have all these local jurisdictions across the country that collect their own stats, right? And they give them to you.
Correct.
And that's how you come to your numbers. So in regards to the shooting in Kent, the Sikh or Sikh man, depending on how you say it, allegedly someone comes up to him, they say, "Go back to your country," something to that effect, shoot him in the arm. Thankfully, he's okay. What is the FBI's role in that case right now?
So in the Kent matter, we have opened a full civil rights investigation, which means that we have predicated a full investigation under the rules that govern our civil rights investigations that are handed down to us by the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. So we make that decision in conference with them. In the case of the Kent Police Department shooting, we're jointly investigating this with Kent Police Department. We have, since the morning after the incident, we've had a significant number of resources invested in the investigation. As an example, last Friday evening, we had 35 FBI agents and federal task force officers out conducting a neighborhood canvass with the Kent Police Department.
And I know it's a joint investigation. I want to show you, I think we have a sketch that was released of the suspect in that. Listen, you're a smart guy, trained investigator. Not a lot to go on there. So based off that sketch, the information that you guys have, how likely is it you're actually going to be able to find the person responsible for this?
So I'll agree, right? That sketch is not great. That's based on probably a really small sliver in time where the victim was able to see the individual that perpetrated the assault, and it was based on the victim's recollection of that. We did provide some more information about the time of the event, the direction of travel of the individual that perpetrated this, but ultimately this is going to come down to somebody coming forward and knowing something about this. They will have seen somebody in the area, they will have overheard somebody talking about this incident, and for that reason we're offering up to $6,000 right now in reward money for information which leads to the identification and arrest of the perpetrator of the event.
Yeah, let me be clear. A fine sketch, whoever did the sketch. It was well done, just not a lot to go off of. But you're right. Whoever did this, someone knows them. Someone knows that they're responsible. So hopefully that reward money will do something to that end. You had a press conference earlier on in the week about this, giving the public an update. And you talked about the impact that these types of crimes can have on the communities where they happen. What kind of impact do they have?
So, look, not a day goes by that we don't conduct some sort of outreach with the affected communities in this. And right now, this type of event causes people to be fearful, right? So it undermines their faith that they can be protected in our communities. Our job as law enforcement, right, is to, specifically the FBI, is to uphold the Constitution and defend the American people. So that certainly is questioned right now, and we have a considerable amount of outreach to try and help that. Part of what we do to do our part is we analyze every one of these events that's reported as a potential hate crime, and we try and determine whether or not they meet the requirements to open a federal case. But in all cases, we assist state and local law enforcement with these investigations. And the idea is that two eyes on something are better than one.
When this happened, and something you even said during the update earlier, was that you're not jumping to conclusions on this. You need to let the investigation run its course before you can decide whether this meets the standard of being a biased crime. But there are people who might be like, Jay, the guy said, go back to your country, and he shot this person. How is that not a hate crime? What do you say to that?
I think in this case, specifically in the Kent matter, we believe it's likely a hate crime. The facts and circumstances collected to date indicate to us that it's a hate crime. We're going under that presumption, but the facts and circumstances will ultimately speak for themselves.
So what if it is? You know, what is the difference there in terms of the punishment that someone could have? At the end of the day, this gentleman was shot and injured by this. But if you add that level of this is a bias crime, what does that mean for the suspect in this case, if and when you're able to track him down?
The suspect would likely be facing not only state penalties in regard to an egregious assault. You know, it could even be attempted murder, manslaughter, etc. But more in the federal side, if it's a hate crime, there are significant penalties for those.
I want to get into the broader issue here. And I know there are people who are hearing about these reports and they're trying to ask themselves, well, what's the reason for this? Seattle police saying yesterday they've had 50 bias-related incidents so far this year, up from last year. The FBI stats from the previous year, 2015, a dramatic increase in hate crimes, especially against Muslims, like a 67% jump from 2014 to 2015 in hate crimes against Muslims. Your position is not one of politics, and I'm not going to ask you political questions about the climate that we're in right now. But when people are hearing constantly on the news Jewish cemeteries being vandalized, Holocaust-related graffiti on walls, shootings like this one in Kent, do you think at the FBI that contributes to even more of these instances happening when someone sees a case of it on the news?
I think probably what it contributes to is people being more attentive to it and more likely to report the information. Personally, I think that's a positive thing, so more information coming forward to law enforcement. The worst case scenario is you see some event and you don't report it. It's best for law enforcement to make an assessment as to whether or not it's a hate crime. And on a probably weekly basis, we get a call from a local jurisdiction in the state of Washington for us to review an investigative matter and make a determination whether it meets the federal hate crime statutes.
The hate crimes that we're seeing here specifically, obviously local audience, local FBI, and I want to try to be specific. Are they typically violent, or are we mostly talking about nonviolent things like graffiti or someone maybe shouting something? I mean, the Kent case, obviously, shooting is pretty dang violent, but generally speaking.
So I would say, generally speaking, a lot more property damage and rhetoric. And as a reminder, the hateful rhetoric is egregious, and it turns your stomach, and it makes people upset to hear the hateful rhetoric. But ultimately, it's protected by the First Amendment, right? It's a protected activity. It's okay for somebody to have an opinion. It's when that opinion turns to intent to take to target somebody based on those characteristics or those protected activities.
And finally, before we let you go, you and I were chatting a little bit in the green room. You're pretty new to the job. How many months have you been on now?
6 months.
6 months. We have a new administration as well. Have your priorities changed at the FBI since we got a new president, or what are you focused on right now?
So perhaps the biggest thing that's happened with this presidential transition is when the cabinet's been brought in, we have a new attorney general, and the focus that the attorney general has put out so far is a focus on stemming violent crimes in our major cities nationwide. So helping state and local law enforcement attack the threat caused by violent crimes. So that includes Hobbs Act violations, RICO violations, gun violations that can be charged at a federal level versus just the state level.
Well, I think everyone can get on board with that. Violent crime in our communities. J.S. Tabb Jr., Special Agent in charge of the FBI in Seattle. We do appreciate your time, and I also want to make sure to mention, as I did with your predecessor when he was on, I know the FBI does a lot of work that we never see, that you never get or take credit for, and we want you to know that we do appreciate everything your agents are doing to keep us safe.
Brandy, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.